Welcome to the silence behind the eyes. Welcome to the shadows where truth does not shine but burns. Welcome to the edge of perception where they thought they saw you for who you were. Simple, harmless, insignificant. But they were wrong. So wrong. Because while they laughed at your confusion and smirked at your silence, you were calculating every step, memorizing every blind spot, charting the cracks in their walls. You let them assume. You let them believe you were lesser, slower, dull. You offered no resistance, no threat, no fire. You made yourself invisible on purpose, small by design. They never even considered you might be the architect of your own eclipse. You played dumb, and they opened every door. They handed you keys to vaults they thought you couldn't read. They whispered secrets in your presence like you were furniture. They underestimated you not because of who you were, but because of who you let them believe you were. And in their comfort, in their arrogance, they made the ultimate mistake. They gave you access, and with access came power. Not overnight, not in sudden sparks, but in slow, grinding inevitability, like rust eating through a chain or silence filling an empty room. They gave you time, and time is lethal when you know how to wait. Let them keep their smug expressions, their backhanded compliments, their flippant tones. You smiled and nodded. You stayed in the background while your mind wandered free. You saw everything. You heard everything. They thought they were in control, managing you like some broken pawn, but you were already 5 moves ahead. You didn't shout. You didn't fight. You didn't protest. You just watched, quietly, deadly, watching people walk themselves into traps they built with their own hands, laughing, while you took notes in the dark. Not because you were weak, but because you were patient. And patience is a weapon they never saw coming. They'll write stories about how you climbed the mountain, how you found strength, how you became something more, but they'll never understand the truth. That it wasn't some sudden burst of confidence or divine inspiration. It was strategy, cold, brutal, surgical strategy. You learned the system by pretending you didn't. You played their game by acting like you couldn't even read the rules. You tricked them blind, and while they celebrated your progress, they never realized you were already leagues ahead, designing your own endgame behind the scenes. There is something beautifully cruel in watching the arrogant unlock the gates for you with their own keys, unaware they're inviting in their undoing. It's the finest revenge. No confrontation, no battle cries, just quiet domination. You let them paint you as the fool, but you chose the colors. You let them finish your sentences, but you wrote the script. Every laugh at your expense was a breadcrumb on your trail. Every time they talked down to you, they gave you intel, and while they soaked in their false superiority, you were building empires beneath their noses. The moment you stopped needing their validation, you became free. But the moment they stopped fearing you, they became vulnerable. You didn't rise like a hero, you rose like a ghost, unnoticed until it was too late. You walked through doors they didn't guard because they didn't see a threat. They saw a shadow, a whisper, a nobody. And that was your greatest camouflage. In a world obsessed with being seen, you learned the art of being overlooked. And that is how you won. Let others burn themselves in the spotlight. Let them shout. Let them demand. Let them posture. You moved through silence, through perception. You didn't need the light. You were born in the void between expectations. And that void is fertile for those who understand misdirection. You weren't lost. You were waiting. You weren't confused. You were listening. You weren't weak. You were coiled. And now, as they look around wondering how you made it past their guards, past their barriers, past their ego. You smile because you never had to break through a wall. You waited for them to open the door. They thought you were a footnote, a filler character, a background noise, but you were writing your own narrative beneath theirs. They thought you didn't understand power, but you were mapping the bloodstream of the entire system while they were too busy performing their superiority. And when it collapsed, when their empire of assumption and arrogance fell apart, they'll say it was bad luck, miscalculation, coincidence. But you'll know the truth. You'll remember the silence. You'll remember the 1,000 little moments where you saw them blink, flinch, scoff. And you'll remember how it all added up to this moment. Because you were never playing their game. You were building your own. And every time they underestimated you, they were handing you pieces. You just smiled, nodded, and built something far beyond their reach. So when they come to you now, asking how, begging for explanations, trying to understand how the nobody became the storm, you don't owe them a word, not a whisper, not a clue. Let them wonder. Let them search. You didn't need their permission. You just needed their assumption. And they gave it willingly. This was not an accident. This was not luck. This was patience sharpened into a blade. This was silence forged into strategy. This was invisibility turned into a weapon. They told you to be small, and you complied, until you didn't. Until you used every small moment as a stepping stone. Until you cracked the code behind their smiles. Until you wore your disguise long enough for it to become your armor. They trained you, unknowingly. Every slight, every dismissal, every shrug. It was a lesson, a weapon, a gift, and you used it all. That's the difference between you and them. They react, you calculate, they speak, you listen, they attack, you wait, because you learned something they never will. That being underestimated is the greatest advantage in the world. That when no one sees you coming, no one knows how to stop you. You didn't need applause. You didn't need praise. You needed access. And they gave it to you, wrapped in laughter. So now, as the lights flicker in rooms you now control, as doors open before you without resistance, as power shifts in silence and old voices tremble, you remember. You remember every moment you bit your tongue, every time you let them think they won, every moment you wanted to scream, and instead you smiled. You didn't lose yourself. You planted yourself, and now the bloom is blinding. They called you naive. You were tactical. They called you forgettable. You were unforgettable in disguise. They called you quiet. You were gathering thunder. They thought you needed help. You needed time. And you got it, all of it. Now look at them, desperate, confused, scrambling to understand how the ghost in the room became the king of the castle. You don't need revenge. You are revenge. Because this isn't just your rise. This is your revelation. This is the unmasking of a force so calculated, so disciplined, so deliberate that it slipped past every defense while they laughed. And now you own everything, not just the throne, but the floor beneath their feet. They played checkers. You rewrote chess, and you did it all in silence. You tricked them blind. They'll call it betrayal now, won't they? Treachery, deceit, as if they ever gave you loyalty, as if there was ever a pact, a bond, a moment of sincerity. No, what they offered you was condescension dressed as charity, pity, coded in polite smiles and patronizing gestures. They thought they were doing you favors, giving you crumbs, as if you didn't see the whole feast behind the curtain. And now they look at you terrified, because the very person they thought couldn't see the game has not only seen it, but mastered it. You didn't sneak in, you didn't beg. You were invited, welcomed, brought in with smiles and open arms, all because they believed you were no threat. That's the irony. That's the brilliance. They opened every door for you because they didn't think you could walk through them. They assumed you'd get lost in the halls, forget the purpose, wander aimlessly in awe of rooms they built. But you were memorizing the floor plan. You were cataloging faces, decoding dynamics, understanding systems. While they thought they were observing you, it was you who was studying them. You learned their language, not just the words, but the subtext, the politics, the hierarchy, the fake laughs, the subtle power plays. You learned it all by sitting in silence, pretending to not understand. They thought they were talking over your head, but you were letting them believe that so they'd speak freely. And they did. Oh, how they did. They exposed their weakness to you in monologues of self-importance. They flexed muscles that you were quietly learning to sever. They paraded in front of you, crowned themselves masters of domains they didn't even own. They thought you were watching in awe, but you were watching in calculation. They looked in your eyes and saw nothing, but they should have seen the storm building, a storm crafted not from chaos, but precision. Because you never lashed out, you never made a scene. You didn't let them see you bleed. You didn't let them see you burn. You just absorbed, collected, planned. And that's what separates you from them. They needed attention. You needed leverage. They wanted followers. You wanted freedom. And while they played to the gallery, you played to the long game. Every time they laughed at you, you took one step further. Every time they dismissed you, you got clearer. Every time they turned their backs, you found another angle. That is how you moved. That is how you won. Not with explosions, but with silence. You learned to weaponize doubt. Not theirs, yours. Every time you questioned yourself, you sharpened your awareness. Every moment of hesitation became a blade. You turned your insecurities into sensors. You became hyper-aware, vigilant, adaptable. You turned fear into fuel. You turned confusion into clarity. They thought your silence meant uncertainty, but it meant transformation. You didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. You just needed to be underestimated. And now, they don't know what to do with you, because the mask is off. And beneath it isn't the fool they thought. They see the strategist, the tactician, the mind they ignored, now revealed to be sharper than any of theirs. And the worst part? They handed it to you. Every access point, every piece of information, every overlooked opportunity, they gave it willingly. Because you played your role so perfectly. You became what they expected. On the surface, you didn't just survive the system, you infiltrated it. And now you own it. You sit at the tables they once kept you from, not as a guest, but as the one who chooses who stays. You walk the halls they tried to gatekeep, and now the doors swing open at your arrival. And they hate it, they fear it. Not because you broke in, but because you used their own rules to win. You beat them at a game they didn't think you could even play. That's not just victory, that's poetic. This wasn't revenge, this was reclamation. You didn't destroy anything, you just revealed the truth. You exposed the rot beneath their polished smiles. You didn't have to bring the whole thing down. You just had to outlast their illusion. And now they scramble, trying to rewrite history, trying to frame you as something you're not. But it's too late. You've already taken the throne. You didn't take their power. You made your own. You didn't need their light. You brought your own fire. And here's the final cruelty. They can't undo it, because you didn't force anything. You just followed the path they laid out for you. You walked the line they assumed you couldn't navigate. You used their own arrogance as a ladder. You climbed and they didn't even see it. And now, from the top, you don't scream. You don't gloat. You don't throw stones. You simply watch them drown in their own disbelief. That's the cost of underestimation. That's the price of assumption. Let them call it luck. Let them call it manipulation. Let them cry foul. Let them pretend they were blindsided. Deep down, they know. They saw the signs. They ignored them. Because it was easier to mock you than to admit you were a threat. It was easier to believe you were slow than to consider you might be strategic. It was easier to laugh than to learn. So let them rot in that ignorance. Let them live in the ruins of their own pride. Because you didn't just win, you evolved. You became the very thing they feared most. A mirror. A reflection of everything they tried to suppress. You didn't become like them. You became something greater, something sharper. You never needed their acceptance. You needed their blindness, and they gave it to you, in full. Now walk through those doors, not with noise, not with vengeance, but with presence. Walk like the shadow they ignored, now stepping into the light they thought was theirs. Because you didn't come to take part. You came to take over. Now, they want to make sense of it. They want to trace your steps, find the cracks, figure out where they went wrong. But there's nothing to find. You didn't force your way in. You didn't scream, didn't demand, didn't tear down a single wall. You let them walk themselves to the cliff edge, blindfolded by their own ego, laughing all the way. And when they ask what your plan was, they'll never understand the truth. That the plan wasn't built in boardrooms or drafted in silence. It was etched into your bones every time they said you weren't enough. You became the product of every oversight, every insult, every smirk that curled on their lips when they thought you were lost. You played dumb, and they opened every door, because nothing is more invisible than someone you've decided is irrelevant. And in that invisibility, you became unstoppable. They gave you the luxury of being ignored, and what a luxury that was. You weren't distracted by their games. You were observing, learning, perfecting. While they wasted energy performing, you were growing. They didn't know they were feeding the very force that would one day eclipse them. Now the air shifts when you enter the room. Now conversations stall when your name is mentioned. Now eyes dart, voices tremble, and the ones who once spoke down to you watch their words carefully. Because power has changed hands, and it didn't happen with explosions. It happened through erosion, a quiet takeover. One assumption at a time, you pulled the ground from beneath their feet. They thought they were watching a servant, but they were watching their successor. And now it's done. You didn't just flip the script, you wrote a new book. You created an empire out of the dust they left behind. You didn't raise your voice. You raised your standard. You didn't make noise. You made moves, strategic, surgical moves. Every door that opened for you wasn't a gift, it was a weakness revealed, and you took it. Not with pride, but with purpose. You weren't out for blood, you were out for proof. Proof that you didn't need to yell to be heard, proof that you didn't need to be seen to be dangerous. Let them panic. Let them gather in hushed rooms, trying to decide how to deal with you now. Let them call you manipulative, calculating, cold. Because you are, and you had to be. You didn't get here by accident. You didn't stumble into this power. You earned it, piece by piece, day by day, smile by fake smile. You earned it with every quiet nod, every swallowed insult, every forced laugh. You became who you are by breaking yourself down and rebuilding in silence, while they were too busy performing strength to build any of their own. This is what they never understood. That silence can be sharper than steel, that patience can be a blade, that playing dumb doesn't mean being dumb. It means being dangerous enough to wait. It means being disciplined enough to endure. And most of all, it means being aware of who you are, what they are, and what this game really is. They played checkers while you mastered war. You weren't playing to win points. You were playing for the end game, and the end game is here. So now what? What do you do? Now that you've walked through every door, now that you hold the pieces they didn't even know they lost, you don't gloat. You don't stop. You don't wait for applause from the same mouths that once dismissed you. You keep moving. You keep building. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new chapter where you write the rules. And the people who thought they controlled your future, they don't even have a seat at your table. You don't owe them kindness. You don't owe them closure. You owe yourself victory. And you earned it by being what they never saw coming. You tricked them blind, not through lies, but through truths they refused to see. Your strength, your discipline, your endurance. All things they mocked, all things they missed. And now, you stand tall, not because they lifted you, but because they ignored you long enough for you to build yourself without their interference. They opened every door, but they forgot to ask who was walking through. That's their mistake, and they'll carry that mistake forever. While you move forward, not as a shadow anymore, but as the storm, as the reckoning, as the reminder that just because someone plays dumb doesn't mean they're not watching. Just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they're not calculating. Just because someone isn't seen doesn't mean they aren't already in control. This is your power. This is your truth. And they can't take it from you because they never gave it to you. You took it. Silently, strategically, unapologetically. You used everything they handed you and turned it into fuel. Every door they opened became a new path. And every time they looked at you and saw nothing, they gave you more time, more space, more freedom to build everything. And now, you have it all, so don't stop, don't slow down. The shadows you rose from still whisper. There are more doors, more games, more people who need to learn the hard way. Let them sleep, let them laugh, let them dismiss you. And when they do, smile and open the next door.